All right, well, I'm Steadman Harrison. Welcome to the Center for Creative Leadership. I've been here for the last 20 years at CCL. 15 of those were in Greensboro. The last 5 have been in Ethiopia. And I will tell you that when I went to Ethiopia the very first time, and actually Uganda came first, I had a lot of fears. Those fears looked like all kinds of things you might be familiar with, but when you travel to foreign places, things like malaria worried me. I went and got all kinds of shots downtown. I was worried about security issues, especially going into places that I didn't know who the warring tribes were, what was going on in the backdrop. Those kinds of things were on my mind. What I will tell you is that I worked through a lot of those early on. So going to Uganda the first time, concerns about wildlife, snakes, monkeys, things screeching in the night, all of that seemed to sort of disappear a little bit. The one fear that I still had that was still very much on my mind as I went to Ethiopia in 2006 on a later trip was HIV/AIDS. I had a friend who had actually had a needle stick, Dr. John White. He was doing all kinds of HIV intervention work in Ethiopia, and he had this experience of a needle stick with contaminated blood. He had to go through amazing steps to make sure that he didn't actually have HIV as a result. What they do is they put you on ARTs, so you immediately have to take all of the drugs that a person with full-blown AIDS would take. Now, what John told me was that it gave him a deep empathy. He started to understand what the patient had to go through. He had understood what the food regulations were. So in other words, if you aren't eating at the right times of the day, if you're not taking your meds at the exact time during the day, it messes with your system. So as an outcome of this, he had a high degree of, I think, empathy that wasn't there before. But what I had as a result of him telling me his stories was a great deal of fear. And where I was going on the first trip to Ethiopia during one of my visits was to go out to a place called Asko. It's a little town outside of Addis Ababa where there was a 700-person orphanage, and it was established by Mother Teresa's home. Mother Teresa came there in person. She started 2 outreaches in Addis Ababa and in Asko. And the one in Asko was specifically for HIV children. So if you were born with HIV, so in other words, if your mother had HIV, you come into the world and you're already in a very fragile place. They would bring you to Asko because oftentimes the mother was passing away, so these kids were being abandoned, but they already knew that they had the challenge of HIV ahead of them, and they'd bring them to this orphanage. If you started showing symptoms of sickness or illness at a very young age, 3, 4, 5, you get tuberculosis and they can't figure out how to get rid of it, pneumonia strikes, they will often do the tests and find out that that child also has HIV, and they would bring them there. 700 of them. Walking through, it was well resourced, but the numbers were so large at the time that they were allowing kids to sleep 2 to a bed, feet to feet, head at the 2 ends. It was one of those things that really grabbed your heart, grabbed your attention. I listened to one of the elder nurses that was there. She was a sister who had been with the orphanage since the very beginning. And she said Mother Teresa came here with one mission in mind. She wanted these children to be able to die a dignified death. She wanted them to die with dignity. Now, what had happened in a very short period of time was that the medicines around HIV and AIDS had been made available. Our drug companies in the United States and Europe had made these more highly accessible, and suddenly people were living very long and healthy lives with HIV and AIDS. So the population that was fragile, that was really almost, if you would, in a bubble, that couldn't leave their homes because of concerns that they would catch a cold, they would run into tuberculosis, they would come back with a life-threatening disease. They were now actually living quite healthy lives, but they had never gotten outside of the bubble. These kids had lived their whole lives at Mother Teresa's home in Asko. I asked if I could get a few of these kids together. So me and another friend said, we want to do something unique. They've never left the compound. They've lived in a bubble their whole lives. We want to take them out on a hike. We want to get these kids out of their environment, take them up onto the first hill, just to have a picnic, play some ball with the local neighbors, but just get them some exposure beyond this, very small world that they'd been living in. And I had the privilege that day of walking up the hill with a group of 30 HIV-positive youngsters, again, vibrant. This is Mackie. McDelowit would be her full name. Mackie and I got to know each other well as we were walking up the hill. She's, excited because she's seeing things for the very first time. Imagine, and I'm seeing things for the first time, and I've got somebody to share that with. She's seeing, as an example, somebody who's taking the grain and the wheat and grinding it down to make bread. She's never seen this before. She's seeing in the backdrop all the kinds of things that we would pass along the way, animals, which haven't been inside her compound that she's never seen before. It was an amazing experience to share in just a simple couple-hour walk with a young person, experiencing a lot of the new things that I was experiencing as well. She's a great travel mate. She speaks English well. And we get to the top of the hill. And it was the first place that we could really get a view. And we walk out onto a little bit of a ledge where we had this nice overview, and all 30 kids sort of pressed forward. And we looked down into the valley. Now, Mother Teresa's home had done something unique with the baby's home. They had painted it this bright orange. And so you could see it, even though it was a hazy day, you could see it from a distance. I had taken a couple of CCL colleagues there from time to time. We would do things in the baby's home like just hold a baby, even for 20 or 30 minutes, because they had so many babies, infants that were there, toddlers, that never got human touch. They didn't get the experience of having that swaddling or just time in somebody's lap. And so for us, it was this huge privilege just to go and donate a little bit of time so that that child could have that human touch. And the baby's home stood out to me when I was there. And so I just said to the kids, hey, look, there's the baby's home. Now, what happened was we came out rather rapidly onto this hillside. You have 30 kids lined up looking down who had never been out of the compound that they had grown up in. They looked out for the very first time and they saw their neighborhood. They were able to identify where they were from. And they were able to see this amazing shift of perspective happen. Jaws were dropping open. People were saying, oh my goodness, there's where we're from. Like that's our house. That's where we're from. And they had this realization that the world was a bigger place. Mackie and I kept talking, and I asked her, I said, have you looked in the other direction? And she turned around and she saw Addis Ababa in the distance. And she saw the hillsides. I don't know if you can actually tell from this image or not, but you've got a mountain chain, another mountain chain, and then there's a really big one in the distance there. That's a 15,500 foot volcano that's in the backdrop of Addis Ababa. These kids had been living in a valley and had never laid eyes on that mountain before. Suddenly their world was so much bigger. Kids like Mackie that day, those 30 kids, had a shift of perspective that was powerful. Their world was changed forever. And so was mine. My world could never be the way that it was before because I had seen even that piece of it through their eyes. I think that this is an important thing. The Center for Creative Leadership as an organization is really only the people that make it up. And when we have an experience like that shift of perspective, we as an organization get to benefit. Numbers of us have had these shifting perspectives over the years. We've gone to a different place, we've seen a bigger world, we've seen an opportunity, and we've come back to talk about that, to actuate it, to do something with it. And so what I want to talk to you about briefly is a little bit of the shift of perspective that we're having at the Center for Creative Leadership. You may have noticed, even as you came in today, or perhaps driving around our environment here in Greensboro, a bus with a new logo on it. We've recently rebranded. The Center for Creative Leadership had this older, very well-known brand and logo. We've gone through the process of reevaluating who are we as an organization, what is our brand, and what does that look like visually. You'll notice Leadership Beyond Boundaries in the middle up there as a logo. The reason that we have our own logo and the fine print and initiative of the Center for Creative Leadership was when we grew this movement, Leadership Beyond Boundaries, out of the incubator here at CCL, there was some concern about what would that do? How would it be perceived? And we sub-branded and sort of kept ourselves at a distance for a period of time. What's happened in recent months is that the Center for Creative Leadership has embraced that sub-brand, brought it back in, and it's become part of the core of who we are as an organization. Leadership Beyond Boundaries, a movement, some specific products and services, a focus on democratizing leadership development for people everywhere has become part of who we are as an organization. The brand, by the way, that you see in our upper right-hand corner in terms of a logo, the visual identity goes back to our Vicks VapoRub roots. Some of you are coming for a first time to CCL. I was explaining to a visitor earlier today that Smith Richardson, downtown on Elm Street, asked his uncle, so what's the best product we have? And Uncle Vic said, well, this pneumonia salve is working well. And out of that conversation and the things that happened, Vicks VapoRub was born. The Vicks pharmaceutical company grew. They did little things like innovating by putting samples in the US mail system and putting up billboards wherever there was a Coca-Cola sign. Some very interesting things came out of that. But they noticed as they grew a global organization that leadership was the biggest challenge that they faced. And so they started the Center for Creative Leadership with this tagline, leadership development for the benefit of society worldwide. Benefit of society worldwide. That, I believe, is what we're on the cusp of realizing as an organization. So the point of view that I want to introduce today is around societal advancement. You'll see on the tables where you are, you'll see on our website if you go to ccl.org, you'll see 5 levels of impact. For a long time, 45 years now, we've been focused on leadership exclusively, and we know things about individual leadership development. We know things about groups and teams. More recently, we've gotten the knowledge that we have around organizational leadership out to a bigger world. But the thing that we're starting to talk more and more frequently about is the work of the collective, the work of changing the fabric of a community or a society or a piece of society, and we call that societal advancement. CCL names whatever we have to say about one of those levels of impact or an area of our business. We talk about it as a point of view, a POV, and you'll hear that language more and more frequently within the fabric of CCL. We've called this language out. I want you to know it's not tried and true yet. It's something that's in process. There's a group of people talking about this. But the language that we've come to date says this: we believe that developing leadership and human capacity can enhance the human condition. The next thing that we focus on beyond enhancing the human condition is this notion of who our target audiences are: youth, women, underserved, particularly those organizations that are helping those groups of underserved people. So if it's an organization like a non-government organization, an NGO, if it's a government body, if it's a group of people who've come together in community to help one of those, that's a group we want to come alongside of. We do societal advancement, sometimes directly. We might be funded by US aid or by a government to go in and actually change the fabric of society in some part of the world. Or we work in partnership. We do it indirectly. We may help an organization like World Vision or Plan International, and they in turn are doing the really heavy lifting of actually working at the grassroots with a bigger piece of the societal fabric. Notice that we do it in partnership. This is a key piece. We partner with other institutions to co-create knowledge, co-design new things, new solutions that use the lever of leadership to create a better world. Point of view, societal advancement, enhancing the human condition, creating a better world. We've talked about benefiting society worldwide, but I think what's happening at CCL these days is a shift of perspective, seeing what we have to offer in a much bigger world. Now, as we move into that and start to take it more seriously, we have to ask ourselves some questions. And one of the key questions that our executive team is asking right now is, what are the strategic drivers that will make that sort of language, that sort of aspiration, societal advancement, possible? And I liked the language that we use at the Center for Creative Leadership to talk about strategy, so I pulled these out. These are strategic drivers. Notice the middle language here. They describe what is absolutely vital, or perfectly essential to cause the mission to be achieved. What is it that we as an organization, 45 years into our history, have going for us that allow us to accomplish enhancing the human condition, making the world a better place? The last thing I'll call out is that when we look at this, we have to prioritize. This will make a little bit more sense as we come to the close of this presentation, but priority calls out really what is in the top 5 list, what's not, and what's number 1 versus number 5. So we actually went through some very careful vetting processes as we looked at strategic drivers to name those and then to say what's number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Again, a work in process, but something I want to talk about with us today. The picture may catch our attention. These are Leadership Beyond Boundaries friends. I would say to you that we should actually have a picture of our entire organization. If we could have a snapshot of 600 staff, that might be a centerpiece. If we could add the picture of 600 adjuncts and associates, like these are facilitators, coaches that speak dozens of languages and are in all kinds of places around the corners of the world, they should have their faces up here as well. We should probably add in there, and I noticed in the introduction, all of these people that we don't really consider on a regular basis as our talent, our staff. How many of you in the room, raise your hands, are interns, postdocs? You're here because you're doing a practicum, but you're in relationship to us because of an internship, academic or business oriented. How many of you, please, raise your hand. Raise them high so we can see that. So what would you say, guys? A third of our room? Is that right? So about a third of the room is actually in that category. In Addis Ababa, if we look at our staff profile, beyond our 20 or so core staff, we have Fulbright Fellows, third-year Peace Corps volunteers, people who are with us from 6 weeks to 6 months to maybe a year and a half or so, but they're coming alongside of our work and they represent our talent, they represent our staff. This, by the way, this picture was taken a couple of weeks ago. We had our retreat at Furniture Land South. Furniture Land South, if you haven't visited, is down in High Point. I have no idea how many square feet they have of furniture. But the reason that we had our Leadership Beyond Boundaries retreat in a place like Furniture Land South was to shift perspective, to look at ourselves in a different context and see things from a different angle. We saw acres, honestly, of furniture. Acres of things that I would say have high utility, like a chair. And you have to ask the question, why is it necessary to have acres and acres of seating of different kinds? Some of them are very inexpensive and affordable. Some of them were extremely high-end. You would see things that were actually fit for all kinds of contexts. A different kind of look and feel, a different kind of backdrop would fit for one chair versus another. But they were all chairs. They were all instruments that help us. They have a utility. And leadership for us is like that as well. So we make very high-end solutions at the center, things that elite people get to be a part of and sit in. We also have those things that are affordable and scalable solutions so that everybody's sitting in the same kind of utility, no matter where they're from, no matter how old they are, no matter where they've come from in terms of backgrounds. It's a very important thing for us. And so we had a little bit more shift of perspective that day. Notice the kinds of things that we're calling out. So number one in terms of a strategic driver is staff and talent. We're talking about the people who do the facilitation, do the design and the discovery work, do all of the kinds of things that are necessary for societal advancement. We call out the fact that they have growth mindset. They're learners. They have this thing that we talk more and more about these days at CCL called humility. This notion that they don't know it all, and in fact they honor the fact that the leader in context likely knows leadership in context better than we do. This is really important. We're recruiting and retaining head and heart, mission-minded, mission-driven individuals who come to the Center for Creative Leadership because they want to enhance the human condition and make the world a better place. This is really important stuff. It's a different subset, perhaps, of what the organization might have looked like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But these days, this is the talent that sets us up for success in societal advancement. That's a big deal. Human-centered design, collaborative thinking, the ability to do things that we don't quite have figured out yet. All of this would come under that staff and talent concept that sets us up for success in the future. Now, what I'm going to do really quickly is for every one of these, pair up for you an example of societal advancement that we're invested in. There's a school in Raleigh called Ravenscroft. It's a private school. It wanted to differentiate itself from all of the other schools that are out there. And it engaged CCL in a dialogue about bringing leadership development, but not to the teachers and the board only, but to the parents and to the students starting at kindergarten and going all the way through 12th grade. K through 12 leadership development. What is it for a 5-year-old to understand themselves, to understand others, to lead self, to lead others? And what does it look like in terms of curriculum year after year throughout that school system? John Ryan went over and made a visit, our president, and he said he was blown away when he heard a group of youngsters at Ravenscroft playing a game, some sort of game that they were all engaged in, and he heard one of these 5-year-old kids say, "No, no, no, stop, everybody listen, we're not aligned." This notion that's there that we actually have the opportunity to embed our language of direction, alignment, commitment, even at the earliest of ages. This is going to be societal advancement. It's going to change the fabric of the way education is perceived. Another very wealthy school, the Hershey Milton School up in Pennsylvania, started by the Hershey brand, focusing early on exclusively the orphan population. They have I got this right yesterday, a $13 billion endowment, the way that they're set up and established. All of that goes to focus on the education of these kids who are coming through that school in perpetuity. It's a good school, high-end school. They want to learn from what is being done at Ravenscroft, and they've just gifted us our first contract for $1.2 million to do the work of bringing leadership in, K through 12, to transform the fabric of who they are as an institution, to think about the future in a different way. Now, something that's important is that in both of these schools, we have CCL staff, center faculty, that work in those environments full-time. They have offices. They rub shoulders with everybody. The way that Joel Wright describes it from our Early Leadership Beyond Boundaries group is boots on the ground. Keep that in mind. Talent, staff, a unique disposition, a willingness to go in, to learn, to do something we've never done before. The second thing that we called out in terms of a strategic driver is this notion of research, that our reputation stands on our 45-year history of research. We've been known for a lot of great products and services, but if we're not doing effective research, we're not coming up with new products, that our proven and cutting-edge reputation is in question. So research is called out as number 2, and I want to give you an example of how an organization came to CCL because of that reputation. They said, you know what, we want to work with the Center for Creative Leadership because we want the Cadillac of leadership programs in Ethiopia at the grassroots, and we can afford a Lada. You know, we can afford the least expensive of the vehicles, but we want a Cadillac. And that was the Forum of Federations. So Forum of Federations came to the Center for Creative Leadership. You may have seen here at CCL in the last couple of days Sean Houlihan, who's the National Director for Forum of Federations. He was here from Ethiopia. And the conversations that we've been having are about scaling out leadership solutions to change the fabric of society in terms of the way that government functions. Ethiopia is a system of states like the United States of America. They have 7. And they need to decentralize that government, and they want participation, leadership participation in the smallest units of the governmental system. And they came to the Center for Creative Leadership to say, we're going to teach federalism, but we need you as our partner to teach leadership. And the reason we want you is because you've done an amazing research. We need boundary-spanning leadership. We need to be able to do DAC and big systems to rethink the future of what a country, in terms of a government, stands for. How do we make them more democratic? How do we make them more of a good, healthy system? Well, that's going to be through effective leadership development at all levels of government. And so we've done training of trainers in phases 1 and 2, and we're going to do coaching and evaluation and research in phase 3, and that's German funded. To the tune of about $500,000 in terms of the work that we will have done by phase 3 with this one project. So some scaling initiatives. A third one that comes to the forefront, so as we looked at these strategic drivers, we said, you know what, people used to come to us. In fact, we sort of had a relationship, word of mouth, that was substantial and it was enough. It was enough for us to be able to sort of leverage our brand name, and people would come to CCL. But now, networks and partnerships mean that we have to go out. If we're going to do societal advancement work, CCL, if we're the center of that network node, has to be connected in a much different way than it's ever been before. And that means willingness to partner at a deeper level. Our partnerships used to look like business schools. And business schools, as you know, want to do what CCL does. We don't always make easy partners. And so it drove things like memorandums of understanding, contracts, all kinds of negotiation, what's theirs, what's ours. All of those things came down to hard conversations. These days we're doing partnership in handshake. In Addis Ababa, we share an office with a design thinking firm, with a publishing house, We don't have an MOU. We just said, you know what, we'll pay the lease one month, you pay the lease the next month. We'll continue to operate under the same roof, and we'll learn from each other and use each other the way that we need to. I wanted to give you an illustration of that. And so I'm going to use a coffee bean as an example, and there's a reason for this. In a lot of parts of the world, there is a movement to start self-help groups. And a self-help group usually is a group of women that come together and begin to save whatever money that they have in order to invest in one thing at a time among the group of, say, 20 people. In Ethiopia, most of the women's self-help groups did not have enough money to start the savings account. They didn't have a burr. You just can't divide a burr down any further. And so what they started with was saving coffee beans. If you save enough coffee beans, you take it to the market and you sell it, and you actually have some cash to work with. Tier Fund came along and started working alongside of them. CCL's worked with Tier Fund on some of this. And now there are 20,000 self-help groups worth more than 10 million in capital, all starting with coffee beans. Keep this idea in mind that when you begin, you have to begin with what you have. And so when we went in 2008, we had a single partnership, a single relationship, Midrock Technology Group, an invitation to come to train 150 leaders, primarily as executives that were going to come through a program at Unity University. As we moved forward, primarily leveraging the networks of our incoming staff. These were Ethiopian national team members that knew a lot of people, that introduced us into the streets. And suddenly we got to know some other organizations, groups like World Vision. We were USAID funded on an initiative that was HIV/AIDS intervention work in Gambella. As time passed, we started to see our network grow. Today, the network that we have looks like the networks of most of those organizations that have been there 20 and 40 years. So if you call out World Vision and you have them draw a network map, which we often do as a part of our exercises to look at stakeholders, and you draw CCL's network map right next to it, almost identical to organizations that have been there for, again, 10, 20, sometimes 50 years. And that's because this network was paid attention to, it's grown. Leadership Beyond Boundaries as a movement looks a lot like that as well. And the Center for Creative Leadership will rely on partnership and on networks if it's going to do societal advancement. So this was just the first 6 months of this year, but getting us into all kinds of different societal advancement pieces of work, direct funded, sometimes coming alongside of those organizations that are doing that really important work of societal advancement. Now, interesting that number 4 is evaluation. At Center for Creative Leadership, we often think of research and we think of evaluation as almost a sub-bucket. It's just one of those things that come underneath. We called it out in these 5 strategic drivers because we said if we're going to continue to grow societal advancement, we have to do it well enough that we can evaluate that effort and then show people in the future this is what we're doing. These are the results that really matter. We had an organization called the British Council that came to us and said, we want you to be the primary on a group that's going to come together as a consortium to do leadership for hard-to-reach community-based organizations. The reason that they wanted the Center for Creative Leadership to lead societal advancement in hard-to-reach areas in Ethiopia was that we did evaluation. So we partnered with 2 other leadership organizations in Ethiopia, and we've now finished phase 1 of that activity, and that's being funded for a next phase, about $350,000, that gets us out with things like mobile classrooms for leadership. It's going to be an exciting next chapter this next year as we start this in September. But again, it was because of our evaluative efforts. So we're partnering more and more, bringing evaluation in-house in Addis Ababa, and as we go out into a bigger world, we'll take that with us. The number 5, at CCL we've made up words over the years. We talk about learningful experiences. Learningful experiences. You won't find it in the dictionary. So I took liberty and I created a word just for this presentation. It's globility. Globility. The notion is that we need some word to capture all of this stuff that is global. It's about global experience, global footprints. I would also say global mindset, but an understanding and an ability to represent and scale across a big world. The dots that you see up there right now are actually the Center for Creative Leadership's physical sites that are now somewhere on planet Earth. If you roll back the clock not too far, half of those weren't there. We're now in places like India and Africa, and we're having a substantial footprint in those places with people who speak all kinds of new languages. Amharic or Amifan, Who would have ever guessed that the Center for Creative Leadership would be leading the way in the Oromifan language in Ethiopia 10 or 15 years ago? But we're doing that because it's societal advancement. And if we're going to continue to move the needle on societal advancement, this globability is a critical, key, essential aspect of getting us there. I expect, future globe ball there, that you will see a lot more black dots on the map in the future, that we will have other places that we consider hubs, project sites, campuses, whatever you want to say of them, that we're going to be in more places. I'll point to one real quickly that will open in September. That's Madagascar. And in the capital city of Madagascar, we will, in partnership with European Center for Electoral Support, have on-the-ground presence, boots on the ground, in September, full-time staff member who does both the director role and actually trains on a regular basis, has to be both a coach and a facilitator and speaks French fluently. That's coming right around the corner. That black dot will be up there before you know it. These are the things, though, that make possible the next step of where we're going. I wanted to tell you, just in closing, another story, but before I get to that story, sort of look forward in terms of the kind of societal advancement opportunities that loom large. So this is an example, and I'm not naming the name of the organization, but it's a big foundation that just came to CCL within the last few weeks. And they said, this is what we need. We have 20 teams globally that we want the Center for Creative Leadership to be able to help with providing leadership development so that the work of our foundation is able to scale out really good and effective projects in things like public health and agriculture and education globally. We need a 2-day standard program that you can actually standardize across the world, contextualize, and potentially translate across all of the languages where we have those presence. If the Center for Creative Leadership hadn't been doing the work to pilot and build solutions like we have, if we couldn't talk about things like globability, we wouldn't be able to pitch and compete for an opportunity like that. Soon, I hope to have the news that this foundation has said yes to the Center for Creative Leadership and that we're going to be out around the globe training a consistent program that then starts to get into the things that they fund as a next step, because that's societal advancement. The story I want to tell you is from the Middle East. This is a story about a man named Al-Hafad. He lives in the Middle East. This was about, I don't know how many years ago. It was way back when. And Al-Hafad was doing pretty well for himself. He had a big home, a plantation. His neighbors respected him. He was able to host people on a regular basis. He, in fact, was, part of the Arab world, hospitality. Any traveler that came through, he would put them up, give them a place to stay, feed them a good meal. One evening, the man who comes to visit him is a priest who's traveling through from up in the mountains. And they get to talking late at night, and the priest pulls out a very old book, and he puts it down in front of Al-Hafad. And it wasn't a religious text. In fact, it was a geology text. And so he flips through it, and he's showing him all these great diagrams and pictures. And the pictures that Al-Hafad saw that night were of all kinds of different rocks, but the one that caught his attention was the diamond, how it could be mined and then polished and what it looked like when it was complete. And from that point on, Al-Hafad could not get diamonds out of his mind. He thought about them all the time, and he stayed up dreaming about them. And he decided that he would go out on a quest to find diamonds. He had read in the book that you had to find a place where the mountains sort of came together, presented in a valley, sort of pressure as the geology changed. And you had to find these black rocks that had diamonds inside of them. And so he sells big portions of his land, doesn't sell his house, keeps that, but most of the things that he could liquidate, he does, and he goes out. Camel trains, he buys ships, he gets all kinds of things to get him around the world in search of diamonds. It's reported that he found himself on the shores of Spain, now what is Barcelona, and he is at the end of his money, and he is old, and he is ill, and he writes a letter back to his family, and he says, I'm going to die on foreign shores. I never found diamonds, and I'm sorry. I squandered your inheritance, and I have not been successful, and this is the last letter that I will write. The family gets the letter, and news of this sort of travels in the community. The priest who had traveled through there heard about this, and he feels awful. He feels terrible that he introduced this man to this predicament, and he goes to seek out the eldest son to state an apology and to give a blessing to the family. And the son sort of, assuages of him any guilt that he has. And they're walking out onto the front porch, and the priest looks up, from the front porch of Al-Hafad's home, and he sees that the mountains come together and form a valley. And he looks out into the front yard that's just recently been tilled, it's been plowed, and he sees a black rock that's sticking up out of the dirt. And he calls the guard. He said, "Bring a hammer, bring that rock." And they bring it to the front porch, and they smash it open. And guess what was inside? Diamonds. From Al-Hafad's front yard have been mined diamonds that are reportedly in the crown jewels in Russia and in England. It's called the Acre of Diamonds. And from his front yard, the thing that he so sought and so much wanted have come like fields of it in terms of diamonds. I love that story because I think it's about a shift of perspective as well. And so there's a balance. We talk a lot about polarities at the Center for Creative Leadership. Mackie introduced me to a bigger world when we stood on the hill just above Osco where Mother Teresa's home was. And we thought about, looking out at the distance and the big world that we were in. I think Al-Hafad's story shows us that we already have, right where we're beginning, everything that we need to start to make a societal difference. I was looking at a great quote from Mother Teresa, but she said, you have a Calcutta right where you are. And so there's opportunity for societal advancement in our backyard, in a place like Greensboro, in places like Raleigh. Around the world, we have to be looking for the opportunities to do societal advancement work, to change the fabric of society for better, to enhance the human condition. On that walk that day, as I walked up with Mackie, I passed this quarry and I saw these two guys and I snapped this picture as well. But I think the picture for me sort of brings those two perspective shifts together, the bigger world and the smaller world, the work that needs to be done right where we are. This is a little bit of a funny piece for me. I think when we look back at Leadership Beyond Boundaries, many of us would say we were under-resourced to the potential. We started with innovation and we didn't have budgets, we didn't have all kinds of things at our disposal in order to go forward to make this a success. We sort of had to just pull it together, put our own skin in the game, so to speak, to make it a reality. I remember this poor little horse at the end of the day, after I'd been riding it down into Mount Winchi, which is behind us there in Ethiopia, how bad I felt for it because I think I was nearly the same weight as the horse was. The whole point is this: we have to invest in these societal advancement causes. And the way that we do that is to call out the strategic drivers and to start to put money and resource behind those. So what I believe we'll be seeing in the near term is an investment in talent, an investment in research and networks and evaluation and globability, with the end being that we're going to be able to enhance the human condition and create a better world. And that's the kind of work that the Center for Creative Leadership, I believe, will be remembered, and we'll be looking back at a perspective shift without a very long time passing at all. Thank you all for coming today. I appreciate it. So we've got 15 minutes, and I would love to hear, if you want to stick around, questions that you have, observations, comments, introductions that you want to make to other people in the room. If you need to leave, by all means, please do. But if you want to stick around, questions from people on the phone, anybody who would like to chime in with a comment or anything else that you'd like to add, we'd love to have that as well. Anybody in the room have a comment, something to add, a clarification, a question?
Steadman, when you said that your network that you're trying to grow, you mentioned that NGOs and populations, governments are part of your network that you're trying to grow. How much work do you actually do one-on-one with the actual vulnerable populations that you serve?
That's a great question.
How much work would you say you do with, say, NGOs like us?
Mm-hmm. So, okay, and I'm thinking, I'm hearing that as two separate things. So in other words, when we work with World Vision, we're working indirectly. When we work with an HIV/AIDS intervention platform directly ourselves, and we actually take that out and USAID funds CCL, we're actually working with the population. The population we work with directly is actually far bigger than the population that we work with indirectly, but the people that we work with indirectly reach the largest piece of the societal fabric. So to date, we talk about like in the last year or two, out of the Addis Ababa office, we probably work directly with 50,000 people. And the way that we can get to a 50,000 number is because if you go to Kenya and you look at the program that's highlighted here in terms of Youth Voices for Peace or Youth Reforms, we've worked with more than 7,000 youth just in the Nakuru Rift Valley area. If you go to Gambella and you look at where we did Girl Club toolkits and all of the work that we did with public health extension workers and women, it's 3,500 in that one community in Gambella town. Those numbers just ratchet up really quick. But I will say that the people that we're working with, if we talk about indirect numbers, are reaching thousands and thousands. And we want to obviously like turn that engine on faster, and we would love to work with. How many people do you reach each year?
It's on a weekly basis, a little under 300,000.
300,000 young people who are eating meals because of your organization each week.
In education.
Across how many countries?
30.
Yeah. So we would like to be able to work with you guys more deeply to do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
and what comes with the food is the education and the kind of information that's going on. So I'm glad you guys are here today. Looking forward to
absolutely.
next step conversations. Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? Questions, comments?
Yeah. I'm wondering, so when CCL gets to start working in new regions and locations that they've never been to, what's the process in that? Are we reaching out to organizations and people in that region, or are they coming to us, or is it a combination?
It's a little bit of both. I will say, as far as I know, Leadership Beyond Boundaries has done no marketing per se in terms of like sending out flyers or calling people on telephones. So it's all word of mouth. So it's all relationship. In Ethiopia, we talk about contact to contract being at least a year, and that's about 50 coffees. You're going to have to sit down almost every week and have a cup of coffee with an individual before we're going to do work together. So you get to be family, you get to know them very well. This is a good example of what's happened. So you remember that network map in Ethiopia, which has grown big. So our South Africa office calls and says, Steadman, we don't know these organizations. We don't have contacts at Action Aid or Elizabeth Glazer, which is really big in their backyard. We don't know World Vision. Will you invite them to ASTD next week on the 23rd so that Dave Altman can meet all of your client counterparts from Ethiopia that are in Johannesburg? And so now we're extending our networks. We're saying, Ethiopian colleagues, please, invite your South African colleagues into a conversation with CCL. Share with them what we're doing, share with them the models that you think work best, and let's have a next step conversation with them. That's going to be a really fast mechanism for growth. So as we go, partnership does this as well. So European Center for Electoral Support, long-term partner, we piloted all kinds of programs together, primarily in Mozambique, Ethiopia, and Brussels. But the next thing that happened is they end up with EU funding in Madagascar, and they say, man, there's a huge leadership component to this. And so it's 250,000 euros that will be funded to go and deliver in 12 months all kinds of leadership development streams, building on the good reputation, the work that we've already done in the societal fabric. So those are other examples. Yeah. Other questions?
I guess my question is, it sounds like you do a lot of education, leadership training education.
Yeah.
How much would you say you're starting to do maybe some culture change or some different kinds of interventions?
Yeah. I think if we look at the total financial portfolio, the vast majority of the work that we're doing is youth focused and it's education focused. So here in North Carolina, the biggest financial piece of the pie is happening through the Early Leadership Beyond Boundaries team. So it's Ravenscroft and it's the Hershey Miltons, but it's also Southern Methodist University, schools and universities all around. It's getting into all kinds of new spaces with youth leadership development. Golden Leaf is funding us to go out and work with scholars. So that is still a very big piece of it. I would say in Ethiopia, it's the smaller piece of it. So we still do early leadership development, but we're doing a lot more that's at the government level, that's systems, and it really is about changing the culture of the way that government thinks. So when people like Forum of Foundations come, they're saying, we need you to help change the mindset of our staff. We need an environment or a culture where people aren't afraid to step out and try something new. It's not only just fear of failure, it's actually fear of punishment that we've learned holds a lot of people back. If I lose my job, there's no bread on the table. So I'm going to be very careful and I'm going to be very permission asking before I do anything new or different or out of the box. How do we get people in a culture to start to embrace something other than the culture of poverty that they've been in so that they can actually innovate, be entrepreneurs? And that's a large piece of what we're doing out of Addis Ababa. So Forum would be a great example. World Vision would be a great example as well. So they're a 3,000 person organization in Ethiopia, and they touch 1 in 10 people across the country. It's 90 million people. It's a big population to be able to impact. Yeah. Others. I know my dad well enough that he's not even looking at me. I know he has a question. I can feel it.
Comment on the implementation of partnering as you see it, given that that might be a little counterintuitive to those of us who are steeped in traditional business expansion and business management.
Yeah. So one thought that I have is it's different in every location. So Lyndon could talk about partnership in India and some of the concerns, worries, challenges that we might have there. I have a perspective on Africa. I will say that after 50 bunas, year contact to contract, once we've invested something together, I use the language, we're like family. There is a certain degree of trust. There's a relationship that runs deep that we have in partnering. And it's not whimsical with Desert Rose. We know that they're going to pay the bill to keep the lease going, right? So how is it that we engage that differently in different contexts? We're opening more work in Israel right now, not this week, but as work continues to open up there, we're looking at partnering with a couple of different organizations to help us do that. That will likely look different than it does in Africa. So I think context really matters, and there will be places where we'll pull out the pen and paper and make sure we have our I's dotted and T's crossed. It works differently and better, though, in Africa, in Ethiopia particularly, when the relationship is there to move forward in a partnership that's a little less stringent. Yes?
You had mentioned that that Leadership Beyond Boundaries kind of started on a bootstrap, and you guys were just kind of maybe you were faculty here and came together and started doing this in your, spare time or however you could get it done. And now the organization as a whole, the larger organization, has realized kind of the gem that they have and accepted it. How do you see, how much real resources is the organization putting behind this now? I mean,
So it's a good question. I think our clients are putting the bulk of the resources behind the Leadership Beyond Boundaries movement that CCL's invested in to date.
okay.
But I would say to you, we're on the cusp of the organization saying, look, we're calling out societal advancement, and we're now going to, as we think of next year's budget, think about the things that we have to do to invest in those strategic drivers. So we will likely look at very closely funding things that are going to help us attract and recruit the right staff, build those networks that are so critical, build research that actually speaks to those contexts. There's a white paper here about Ethiopia as an example. We need a lot more research that focuses on the context where we're doing Leadership Beyond Boundaries work. We need much more evaluation on that than we've had in the past. Right now we're having to fund that path, but I think in the future we'll see resources coming to match that obvious market opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any difference on that answer?
No, I think we think about ourselves as a social business, and CCL overall is a non-profit. So oftentimes CCL's got very limited means to drive these things forward. And this idea, the earlier question about partnerships, are ways to work with other organizations to create solutions that are mutually beneficial. But it's really about, finding ways to, if you will, expand that resource
Mhm.
pie, rather than go back to the source and say, well, instead of doing this, give us money to do that. So it's really about a bigger mindset.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Just another perspective on that too is that I think more and more as there are strategic trainings and development opportunities and things like that within the center, there's also more awareness about how somebody who's operating in the space that we're in could benefit by plugging in to those experiences and both contributing what we've learned from our experience with and from others in that training, but also taking away the experiences other folks have had back into this space, and that builds our network internally. So there's been, I think Steadman talked a lot about the network that's been built externally, but within CCL too, there's a lot more, there are a lot more connections that have been created, and I think that openness is a shift that's been significant.
Good. Excellent. Anybody else? Another question? Comment? I mean, enhance something that was said. Yeah, anybody on the phone, chime in if you're still on the phone. Hey, DeSaling, are you on the phone? DeSaling is our finance and human resource director in Ethiopia.
What time is it over there?
That's what I was just wondering. I was doing the math in my head. Not sure if they can hear us, but it looks like he may have called in to hear what was going on from our side. Anybody else? Thank you all. Network, get to know each other. Stick around. If we can have more conversations, that would be great. Thanks.